Hey guys, it's Villain Theory. Standard 2 and Expert 2 are famously not very popular, maybe infamously, and I want to talk about that here. So what went wrong with them? And I want to say as well, some people like them. They do have some upsides. I'm not saying, oh, they're just terrible. We're going to look at why they're maybe not as popular as they should have been, and why that is, and kind of try and understand Standard 2 and Expert 2. Is I think it's something a lot of people haven't experimented with a lot. I'll be honest, I don't play it a lot myself. And of course, this is happening because in one of my previous videos about Standard 3, you guys were like, well, what about Standard 2? And I'm like, oh yeah, I could have talked about that. So when I looked at Standard 3, you guys liked it when I brought in some numbers and charts and spreadsheets and things. So I've done it a little bit here, but it's not quite the same. These numbers mostly hold a meaning to me, but I'm going to talk you through them a little bit. So I'm working on going through every modular set in the game, every villain in the game, all the encounter cards, and rating everything. And it has been a nightmare. It is not an exaggeration to say I've been through basically every card you could ever find in an encounter deck, probably 3 or 4 times, while applying different forms of maths and things to them, which is a nightmare. And numbers can't tell the whole story. There's a lot of experience going into this as well. Obviously, I play this game way too much, and different things, but I'm trying to condense things down to a good rating. Now, one number will never explain everything about a modular set, different heroes, decks, how the card interacts with the villain and other encounter cards in the encounter deck. These are all huge factors, and there's even more, boost effects and boost icons. How do you factor those into the difficulty? What if the player's running, lots of stuns and you're not seeing many boost things come up? It's a whole topic, and no one number will be perfect for everything, like I say, but I have been trying to put numbers to everything. And most sets in the game, and actually most villains, fall between a score of 3 and 5. So if you're between 3 and 5, you're pretty kind of, in the right place. Now, something that's almost a 5 and something almost a 3, that's actually quite a big jump in difficulty, but it's still within kind of the realms of what you might expect. So anything that goes over 5 is very difficult, and anything that goes under 3 is generally pretty easy. And we can see this here. Standard and Standard 3, 3.8, 4.1 respectively. That's pretty normal. And actually, I rated these standard sets after everything else because I kind of forgot about them. So I'm very pleased they kind of turned out to be in the middle around that 4 mark. So that's pretty good. Standard 3, if you play and win quickly, it's typically easier. We talked about this more in my previous video. While I think overall it's just slightly harder. It's 0.3 higher in my little weird system here. And I'm really just pointing these out though to show how Standard 2 at 6.6 is in its own league. It's definitely into the hardest sets in the game. The hardest card in that set, which I think there are 2 copies of, maybe in addition to Shadow of the Past, definitely elevate it a lot, whereas some of the other ones aren't as bad, but it's a very nasty set. I see this with Expert and Expert 2 as well. Expert 2 at 7.7, and I will say this number of 7.7 is rated for solo play, because Expert 2 has one card that goes haywire in, multiplayer. 7.7 is basically joint highest in my system right now. It's very nasty. So the Standard 2 and Expert 2 are huge jumps in difficulty. And a lot of people say it's harder to play on Standard 2 than just on regular Expert. And I think the numbers kind of support that here. There are some mitigating factors if you only have stage 1 and 2 of the villain. Generally, that is making it a lot easier. But it's definitely close enough to become an interesting discussion. Now, these numbers as well don't take into account the steady, the permanent effects from the Standard 2 and Expert 2. So Standard 2 comes with this card, which is called Formidable Foe, and the enemy gets set up throughout the whole game. And if you're an Expert, every enemy gets steady throughout the whole game, and you get an acceleration token, which actually makes these even harder than these numbers suggest in comparison to the other numbers on there. So yeah, pretty scary as an overview, but let's see how that happens. So in Standard 2, there is a copy of Shadow of the Past. It's exactly the same. We don't really need to talk about this. Obviously, it's a very scary card. Next up, we have the new version of Caught Off Guard, which is Overwhelming Force, which instead of making you discard any old upgrade or support, you have to discard the highest cost one. This is pretty notable. Cards like Skilled Investigator are ultra popular, Night Nurse for protection, so on. There are just a lot of cheap cards, like maybe Clarity of Purpose even. Although, it's a good card, do you want to get rid of it? But probably, yeah, rather than one of your more expensive cards. So, Caught Off Guard, letting you choose something really cheap, typically makes Caught Off Guard a really easy encounter card to deal with. The only exceptions are, when you get it early on, you've only played 1 or 2 things, maybe your best things that you prioritized early, and they're gone. Overwhelming Force means that at any point in the game, even if you've got cheap stuff out, you're getting rid of something really good, which is terrible. But the thing is, those expensive upgrades and things I think they're good enough that you probably want to risk playing them anyway. Maybe, you know, Avengers Mansion becomes less desirable. This is kind of the demolition card for the mansion. But, you know, in general, I think anything free cost or whatever, you're still probably trying to play it anyway, and you're just hoping this doesn't come up. And it does have a boost effect as well. An additional boost card on top of 2 icons is actually pretty scary, making the villain hit very hard or scheme for a lot. Next up, we have the new version of Advance, which very simply says the villain schemes, but with +1 scheme, so it's a little bit scarier. And again, we've got the boost effect that's giving enough a boost card on top of a boost icon, pretty scary as well here. If we take this onto Expert, where we have that extra acceleration token from that permanent setup kind of card, Formidable Foe, if the villain scheme with +1 scheme on top of that, it's just a lot more threat to deal with in solo play. It's going to make those main schemes feel very, very tight on space, and they already kind of do in solo a lot of the time. So this is very scary, and like Advance, there are 2 copies of Dark Dealings. Next up, we have the new version of Gang Up called Mob Mentality. When revealed on the hero side, it's exactly the same, except it surges, which is awful. And the alter ego side is kind of interesting. Arguably, the alter ego side of Mob Mentality is actually easier. You discard top 7 cards of the encounter deck, and you put the first minion you discarded into play. So the alter ego effect kind of becomes finding a minion, and I really, really like this effect. I wish they did this more. I think they could have standard sets more about bringing out the best of the, you know, villains encounter deck and the other modulos. I think that's really fun. But I'd rather get kind of a random minion than surge into potentially, you know, another card in standard 2 or anything else. So I think that's fine. And if there's no minion in those top 7 cards, it just goes away. So Mob Mentality, Alter Ego, fine. In hero form, awful. An attack that surges is very, very bad news. Which brings me on to the next card. So in Standard 1, we have Assault. In Standard 2, we have Total Annihilation. And I kind of like how the art went from Venom to, I believe that's Carnage there. And I'm sure you guys have read this by now. It's on the screen here. But when revealed, hero, the villain attacks you. That's exactly the same as Assault. But that attack gains Overkill. This card is a game ender on its own, but we have to remember it's in there with the rest of the standard 2 cards, which are giving a lot of additional boost cards as well, and if you're very unlucky, that can chain together and you can be getting hit for a ton. To make matters worse, it has the Surge keyword, and again, like Assault, there are 2 copies of this. So we have 2 attacks with Overkill, with Surge, in, you know, rotation in the encounter deck if we use this, and this is super, super, super dangerous, and to make matters a tiny bit worse, it also has a boost effect. If the villain is attacking, this attack gains Overkill. So even when it's not your encounter card, it could be your boost card, and you're getting hit with Overkill, which is really punishing blocking with allies, which in some ways is necessary, but it's a surprise factor, I think, that catches people off guard. And yeah, this is the most brutal part of Standard 2 by a landslide, and very, very scary. So how did we get to Total Annihilation, which I'm pretty sure was kind of the concept for Standard 2 and Expert 2. I'm pretty sure Total Annihilation was kind of their goal. They wanted to annihilate the players. And I kind of think it went like this. Early on in the game's life, players complained the game was too easy. Who are players? I don't really know. I didn't play until the 2nd expansion, which is, you know, years and years ago now. So I think I've got some credentials with the game, but, you know, I have no idea quite what the discussions and, you know, social media and things were like then. But this game, Marvel Champions, comes off the back of games like Arkham Horror and Lord of the Rings LCG. These LCGs, also by Fantasy Flight Games, are typically a lot harder on average than Marvel Champions. There are some exceptions, you know, I'm sure Ronan's up there with, you know, some of the worst of them, at least from what I hear. I haven't actually played much of the Lord of the Rings game, but long story short, I think people expected Marvel Champions to kind of be on that kind of difficulty level, and while plenty of people enjoyed it as it was, a lot of people found it too easy. They played the game, they beat all the scenarios on Expert, and they were kind of like, what do I do now? And they added Heroic Mode, which is get an extra encounter card every, you know, villain phase, which I think it's fun that it exists as an official kind of way to play the game, but I don't think it was a perfect solution. And I think Standard 2 and Expert 2 was kind of the designers trying to account for that. Like, oh, they think the game is too easy, let's add this extra difficult way to play. But I think they took it too far. I think they went a little bit overboard. The designers basically leaned into Surge and Overkill being, in my opinion, the primary part that makes Standard 2 more difficult. People do not like Surge, and I don't think they maybe had enough feedback because, you know, they have to work so far in advance for people to say that, and I don't know the full details of who designed Standard 2. It comes in the hood, which is a project that was led by Michael Boggs, who is the now ex-lead designer alongside Caleb, who was, one of the original lead designers as well. Michael Boggs left, but he has some really amazing designs. If you like anything from Sinister Motives, it's probably down to him. Some people's favorite heroes are really down to him. There's some really, really fantastic scenarios and heroes and cards all down to him. I think he's done a fantastic job, so I don't want to be too negative, because I think generally absolutely fantastic. This game wouldn't be half as good as it is without him. However, if you don't like any of the surge trains you might find in Nebula or Ronan or the Hood, or maybe a little bit of Venom Goblin, and I think Mysterio's in this category because he has a lot of encounter cards as well, but they're generally more manageable. But if things ever go out of control based on encounter cards, you can normally trace it back to a Michael Boggs design. And this is kind of the case for Standard 2 and Expert 2, which came in the Hood, which he was the lead designer on. So yeah, I kind of think it's from that philosophy. I don't think they would design it quite like this nowadays, but they added a lot of surge, and there's a lot of overkill as well, which I don't think players hate as innately, but it's definitely very dangerous. So I kind of feel like they leaned into the wrong things to make it more difficult. It's kind of the same thought process, I think, as the heroic mode. Extra encounter card, surge, extra encounter card. And the problem is making something that's very difficult and then adding extra on top of it, but having the potential for these things to chain together. So bad thing, surge, really bad thing, surge, kind of bad thing, maybe surge again anyway. And at that point, it's kicking you between the legs, and then you're on the floor and it's kicking you again, is kind of the feeling this gives. And the other part of the problem is the standard set is only adding 7 cards into the encounter deck. There are 8 cards, I believe, in Standard 2, but the 8th one is that, or technically the first one is the permanent setup card that is never in the encounter deck. So 7 cards. If one of them comes up, you're getting hurt. If several of them come up, it's going to really hurt. But you might have a game where one or maybe even none of them come up, and it's just like you're playing the regular game. So 7 cards added in is not enough to consistently increase difficulty. And because of that, I think they've had to shoot pretty high. And that means when things come up, it can just suddenly feel very bad. It's very swingy. It hits you out of nowhere. Some people like that kind of, surprise factor, and I think it does have some benefits, but I think it's a little bit too much here, personally, and I think that's kind of where Standard 2, and kind of by extension Expert 2, kind of went wrong. Now, I do like that there is that permanent setup card. If you've watched this channel before, I love anything with permanent and setup on it. Changing the game from turn 1 every turn is exactly what I want. That's the way that modular sets and things you can optionally add in can have the most impact. But unless you're running stuns, or if you're not running many of them, the Standard 2 Formidable Foe isn't doing a huge amount, although if you like to lean into stuns and confuse, obviously it is. Now, the Expert 2 version with the extra acceleration token, that's pretty good, I think, and maybe it's a little bit too much punishing in solo play, but I actually quite like that. So I think that is something it did right. So I'm really glad they continue to explore these setup and permanent things. Age of Apocalypse, latest expansion, basically every mod set had something, or, at least over half of them had something with setup or permanent on it, and 3 of them in the next evolution box did as well. So I hope they continue to implement setup and permanent modular sets and optional things as we go forward in Marvel Champions. And before we move on to Expert 2, I'd just like 15 seconds of your time to talk to you about Into the AM, which is a clothing company that's partnered with this channel. Into the AM is fantastic. I've really enjoyed the clothes I have from them, so it's really fun to be able to offer this to other people. I have some more stuff on the way, actually just ordered, and I'm actually wearing this t-shirt you can see here from them right now, and I hopefully I haven't messed up the camera this time. I think we're doing good. Cool. 10% off with my discount code VTheory. That's a link in the description. It's just intotheam.com/VTheory. And thank you so much if you've ordered anything with my discount code. I get a little bit of the money back. It is an affiliate link, just for full transparency. That's what helps support the channel. If you've not checked them out before, just give it a look. But if you're not interested, absolutely no worries. Let's get on with the video. Up next, we have Expert 2. So most of the cards in Expert 2 are copies of the Expert 1 cards, much like the Standard 2 cards, pretty much all mirror the Standard 1 cards. So Exhaustion, which is Surge and Exhaust Your Identity, becomes Peril, Surge, Exhaust Your Identity, and take 2 damage. And this is kind of scary. So Peril is kind of annoying, but not a huge deal in most circumstances. But having to take damage while exhausting, it's kind of a step up, but it's a good step up. If we were to blank the rest of Slug It out, the bottom half, the boost effect, which we'll come to in a second, I think this is a good way to elevate Expert 2 from Standard 2, because just taking the extra damage is pretty much unblockable, short of, tough cards or energy barrel or something. That's kind of interesting. That's a good step up in tempo. But the boost effect here, deal 1 damage to each character you control, and then give the villain an additional boost card for this activation. This boost effect is going to wipe out any of your 1 hit point allies, maybe the ally you are blocking with, and now the attack is coming straight for you. It's basically kind of overkill, but worse, kind of, with that additional boost card. It's really, really dangerous. If you like to play ally heavy builds, which are kind of the strongest builds generally, this card is going to hurt you. And if it comes up as an encounter card, it's still going to hurt you. How much exhausting it hurts your identity really depends on your hero, because for some of them, it ruins your entire game plan. But for other heroes who like to maybe defend, actually, you can't exhaust if you're already exhausted, and it's a pretty fine card to have happen to you. So, yeah. Next up, we have Ruination. I love the art. It's kind of busy, but hopefully you guys can see this. Might be a bit hard on mobile. But basically, there's like 20 Ultron drones just blasting this town apart, which is a scary thing. Master Plan, though, pretty iconic art. But art aside, the when revealed effects are very interesting. Master Plan is 4 threat on each side scheme. If there's not a side scheme, find a side scheme. Well, discard until you get one, but you know what I mean. Ruination, however, it doesn't try and add threat on initially. It just discards until you find a side scheme, and that gets revealed. But then you have to add 2 threat onto each side scheme in play. So you've revealed a side scheme, which has added probably at least 4 threat in most circumstances. So it kind of equals Master Plan if there is a side scheme in play. But then you add 2 more threat onto that and onto the main scheme. Now, Master Plan can have some bad situations if there's nasty side schemes already out, perhaps multiple side schemes already out, and then Master Plan just adds 4 threat to all of them, and you're like, okay, I'm definitely still need to remove these, but there's tons of threat. But generally, I think Ruination is even worse on top of that, and to make matters worse, on top of the Insight as well, by the way, it has those 4 boost icons, which makes it a very dangerous card to have come up during an attack or scheme activation on the villain. So yeah, this is a big step up as well. But it's not, devastating. It's not going to crush your soul. Next up, we have Cruel Intentions, which is the evolution of Under Fire. This is the worst card in the entirety of Expert 2, I think. One of the worst cards in the game, which Under Fire is already in contention for. So it has a search keyword, just like Under Fire, has peril added, as we're seeing a lot here. The when revealed effect in the solo play is basically the same. You get another encounter card. But with Cruel Intentions, it says give the villain 1 face down boost card as well. So if it happens to be an attack, it's getting the extra boost card, which could be one of the cards we looked at from Standard 2, giving extra boost cards as well. Could be Ruination with 4 boost icons. It's just pretty scary to have that on top of it. But if that was it, I'd say this is fine as a step up from the Expert version. But in multiplayer, it's horrendous because it says deal each player a face down encounter card. So in 4-player, this 1 encounter card effectively transforms into 5 encounter cards, as opposed to Under Fire, which is always 1 that basically becomes 2. This is 1 that becomes 5. This is very, 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 very bad news, and is about the worst thing that could possibly happen to your group. But what's even worse in both solo and multiplayer, I guess not worse than revealing it itself, but worse in general in comparison to Under Fire, it has a boost effect of dealing yourself a face down encounter card. Thankfully, it doesn't deal itself as a face down encounter card, because that would be absolutely devastating. But even if you don't get this come up as your encounter card, you are going to be hurt. You are going to get an extra encounter card, which we've seen lots and lots of Surge in these sets here. It's probably going to be a very bad thing to have happen more than usual. Can it get any worse than this, you ask? Well, actually, no. I think it gets easier. The next card is Seek and Destroy. Expert 2 has 4 cards in it, not 3. There is no equivalent. We don't have anything to compare it to from Expert 1, but Seek and Destroy is a really fun card. I actually love this card. This is my favorite part of Standard 2 and Expert 2. Insight 1, as we've just talked about, that's still fine, but when revealed, you search for your Nemesis minion and put it into play. That's it. This card is basically your Nemesis minion, but it throws on the Insight 1 keyword onto them. But putting it into play means that it skips the revealed effects. So actually, for some Nemesis minions, this isn't too bad compared to their normal effect. I like this card. Seeing more of the Nemesis sets is always good, and this is honestly not too bad. It does have 3 boost icons on, but honestly, this is fine. This is kind of the thing that actually brings Expert score down slightly from its average devastating kind of quality. but still kind of nasty. Some Nemesis minions are very different. Bringing in Beetle with full health from, Wasp's Nemesis set, very different from Dark Phoenix entering play with 12 and tough and villainous and things I think it has. It's just a really, really difficult Nemesis to deal with, so Seek and Destroy's severity will vary. The closest thing I think we have to it is Old Grudge from the Whispers of Paranoia mod set, which just brings in the Nemesis as well, although it is revealed there, and then gets 1 extra hit point. So what is the verdict on Standard 2 and Expert 2? Obviously, they're more difficult. We all knew they were more difficult, but hopefully this video has demonstrated just how devastating these cards can be, with Total Annihilation kind of bringing about what its namesake says, Cruel Intentions being especially cruel in multiplayer, but very consistently giving you extra encounter cards because of that boost effect. It just means Under Fire is basically always there, even in solo play, very hard to dodge. Yeah, this is tough, guys. It's really a big increase in difficulty, but here's the thing. I've seen a video on YouTube from Descry where he beats Ronan on Expert with Standard 2 and Expert 2. How does he do it? Well, it is very, very impressive, but notably, Standard 2 and Expert 2 cards don't really come up as the encounter cards, and that's kind of the problem here. I think Formidable Foe as the permanent setup card was a good idea. I don't think it went far enough. I think the Flight, Super Strength, Telepathy cards from the Mr. Sinister set, from Next Evolution, but you can put those mod sets in any scenario. Those, for me, are closer to what Standard 2 Expert 2 should have been. These kind of static bonuses that really increase the difficulty, rather than these kind of, bombs hidden in the encounter deck that are going to absolutely devastate you when they come up, but they might not come up very much. It's kind of hit or miss. And I also think if they were going to do that, Surge and, additional boost cards even, just adding on extra stuff on top, not my favorite design choice. I think that was a mistake. I think we can be more creative, more engaging, less swingy. I'd rather these kind of swing factor in the villain's favor with just something bad happening, not just more stuff happening that could chain into even more stuff potentially, and just generally leave a bad taste in the player's mouth. And this is why I think Standard 3 has done so well. In my polls, more people are using it than Standard 1 even, which is really, really impressive. Now, it's obviously newer, so that's going to be a factor as well. And yeah, there's going to be some people who don't like it as much, but on the whole, Standard 3 has been a huge success. I hope they make a Standard 4, maybe a Standard 5. I think there's so much untapped potential. I think they can deviate from just new versions of kind of the same as we started with. I think there's so much potential. I actually have some of my own designs I kind of tinkered with in the background. If you guys are interested in seeing that and me talking about that more, let me know. I've typically not done any custom content on my channel before, let alone my own. But if you guys were interested, we could definitely look into that. And I really just want to end this by saying I did a video calling out what we needed in this current expansion wave. And one of them was saying, I really wanted Standard 3. And they did it. But I said, Standard 2 were only unpopular because they went too far. And I stand by that. Now that we have Standard 2 and Expert 2, I think they serve a purpose if people really want a punishing experience. If they really want to be surprised and shake things up. And I think Standard 2 and Expert 2 are especially good for the weakest villains in the game. They definitely need something big to kind of bring them up to a more challenging level for experienced players. But again, I do think maybe Surge was not the way to do that best, so I'd like to see it revisited. But yeah, that about does it. Thank you so much for watching. Definitely check out my discount for Into the AM below if you're interested. We've got a link to our Discord server if you want to talk about Marvel Champions. There's a new players section, there's a technical section, there's a deck sharing section, all that good stuff. And yeah, thanks so much. Like, comment, subscribe, and see you in the next one. Bye.